lack of education in many places, as well as the socio-economic challenges, and not to forget the big climate risk. So we are going to deep dive on all these topics. What does it mean for India? What's the roadmap ahead? And how do we tackle these challenges? And we have the best possible panel to tackle that. Okay, should we get started? So maybe, Alok, we start with you. India is, of course, known for its tech prowess. It's been the big tech hub for many decades now. With all the changes coming in, how do you see India evolving in the tech space and also maybe going up the value chain? So would love your thoughts on what are you seeing and what should we do?
Hello. That works. I think it's already a well-known fact that IT has really been a transformative agenda for India for a number of years and decades now, and it is all set for another trajectory of growth as we see things coming down the line. I think it's very, very fascinating for India to have that kind of a talent pool which is really geared towards addressing the challenge. But at the same time, I think talent development is going to be a very important factor here. So we are working very closely with the institutions to really tailor-made the kind of curriculums and the kind of courses that are needed to harvest the next set of talent to drive that growth. Also, I think the other thing is to have the culture of innovation. So that is very important to bring in the whole workforce, because it's no longer about doing something that somebody tells you to do. It's going to be about how are we actually as a advisor of sorts helping customers to solve their business problems, right? So I think that is the biggest shift that Indian IT companies need to make, is to pivot towards the advisory side of the service portfolio and not just be doing the mundane stuff. And so we are really embarking on the culture of innovation as a main theme for our workforce, and hopefully that is seen and visible in terms of the customer effect. Obviously, the third is to be the early adopter ourselves and to drive that transformation. And thankfully, ITC Infotech, being an IT company, but our parent is a very heavy user of information technology. They are the largest consumer goods company in India, ITC Group. And so they are also the very big agri-commodity company. So we have built a very innovative solution called eChopal, which is available in the hands of millions of farmers. And it is sort of helping them in terms of transformation and using the AI technologies to. So I feel that there is many different dimensions to how this needs to be tackled by India. Talent development being one, the culture of innovation being the other. Also driving digital transformation ourselves and taking that message to the rest of the world. Fourth, obviously, is going to be the sustainable and inclusive growth, I think, because we want to make sure that other people in the ecosystem are also getting benefit. So that's the fourth element of it. And the fifth would be the global presence and partnerships. So because you can't do it alone, and it's a very massively complex ecosystem. So having very solid partnerships and ecosystems are the other things that we all need to work towards. Yeah.
So just very quickly, do you see India being a leader in true tech innovation in the world?
I definitely have no doubts that India will follow through on that particular challenge. And I think in many ways we are already doing some of that. It is a question of doing it in a way that is more inclusive and sustainable for overall the population being the big factor here. How will AI solve the problems of the common masses? How will we make sure that AI is in the hands of the right people to uplift their livelihoods? So I think those are the big things that also India will be coming up with solutions, because they're not the same problems with other countries, but in India can definitely take a lead on that. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. It's a good segue towards you, Dinesh. India as a market is also growing so fast with 900 million plus consumers. The real question is, can we actually tap into that market? And what socio-economic challenges do we have? What infrastructure do we need to build to really give them the right access? E-Chopal is a wonderful example. But can you share some challenges as well as innovative solutions you are seeing?
So, I mean, maybe let me look at it as the glass half full rather than half empty first, and then come back to the challenges we will face. I think in a way, India's competitive strength and the ability to be able to get inclusive growth is the fact that we have this huge base of what I would call as micro enterprises, which actually reach out and create value across especially the rural markets, especially I would call it lesser developed markets of India. I think the focus of this government has been on building the digital public infrastructure, which has meant, whether it be the e-Chopal example, or if I take a look at our businesses, for example, we have linked something like 100,000 garages which do the service across the board, real-time, live. And as you move towards more and more of, I would call it, better linkages for the so-called socio-economic backward regions of the country, you are actually going to find that it creates a competitive advantage for India. So I think that's, for me, one big factor which I think is going to distinguish us, differentiate us, and the usage of technology there is also going to provide maybe very low-cost solutions, which is what I think all the rest of the world are looking for, I would call it, the global south. Right? That's one side of it. The challenges are, I think we spoke about the talent gap, but I think the larger gap is with regard to how do we make sure we don't leave behind these set of entities, because if you leave them behind, you are actually going to create, consolidation in my mind is negative for India. You have to make sure that you get inclusive growth, and consolidation has to mean that you work with these micro enterprises and make them into one ecosystem, and the platforms of this world are what I think going to make a difference for us.
Consolidation, you meant consolidation of companies and so on, right?
No, the typical, pardon me, but the consultant jargon would be, let us acquire those entities and make them into one large monolith, which I think is very common in other parts of the world. But that then creates, I would say, good economic barriers, but also creates disparity in the way in which the growth in the socially economic backward regions take place.
Makes sense. By the way, as consultants, we do consolidation, we also do breakups, so we do everything. So maybe moving over to you, Rajan. In terms of the specific technology growth, over the years we have seen, of course, India's strength in, the core IT technologies, which started with, .com boom and Y2K and so on. And India has moved up the stack and value chain quite a bit. With the current wave of the new technologies coming up, particularly AI, how do you see that as a risk to the technology sector and the skills, as well as an advantage? What is your view?
Well, I think India has long serviced the rest of the world, sitting in India. I think it's time now that, we have a thought process where, you'll have Indian companies actually based out of India, providing global leadership in technology. And I think this is a huge shift in the thought process, the risk-taking, appetite today with Indian corporates, Indian startups, Indian new age companies, and like what Dinesh was saying, consolidators, there are these umbrella organizations. Like, while we have done manufacturing for 2 generations, right, our next 30-year plan of growth is to build an umbrella using large technologies, product leadership, for billions or hundreds of millions of consumers, right? So we see many Indian corporates and groups actually looking at it that way. But I think what has given the biggest spurt to this is also the way the Indian government is thinking of using technologies for the citizens, right? Especially if we take AI, for example. I mean, the impact that AI can have on an average citizen in India across every vertical of their life is massive. And I think, with just so much data, getting captured, and everyone's talking of data centers and, that availability which Indians will provide, the opportunity for innovation, on top of that, to be able to deliver, outcomes to citizens is huge, right? And I think private and public sector can play a very strong role, to make a lot of that happen. We've seen what digital public infrastructure spend, say, for example, in the financial services area with UPI and all of that has done, right? Today, even a fruit vendor or, as we were talking, even a beggar, you can just use your phone and, send money out there and get it, right? So I think that empowerment of being able to use technology, even if you're illiterate, from a consumer end, is very high. What AI will additionally do is, create personalization, be able to create, at a consumer end, a massive outcome. And I think that applies to both businesses as well as to, what governments will do. But, sectorally, if one looks at it, it's ultimately the amount of digitization. Because India, right, while fintech and, all financial services are completely digitized, in agriculture, there's a large amount of digitization happening. Healthcare, which will probably, in my mind, have the largest impact with AI, is still got an opportunity even on the digitization front. I mean, I believe even in the US, that's still a problem. But in India, it's a much bigger problem. So the opportunities across the chain in identifying digitization and AI models and actually building that, lie at different levels across different sectors. And therefore, I see from a 10-year horizon, multiple opportunities coming there. And I think the advantage of an Indian product-led AI ecosystem is the ability to then, globalize that at price points and affordability and price performance, which Indian markets drive very, very differently. We are deeply in the immersive technologies areas, and we're seeing huge, progress there as well. We look at blockchain, not only from, say, IP protection in countries like India, but now becoming, digital lockers for the world through some of those processes. So there are multiple ways in which every technology that is new in India gives us an opportunity to leapfrog to a global leadership level. And, I don't think there could be a better place than Silicon Valley to say, whatever you can imagine, you can create. I mean, and I think that opportunity is vast today in India. And I think this collaboration, therefore, with Silicon Valley through platforms like Evolve will go a long way.
So, Dinesh, you said glass half full, but Rajan seems to be glass 99% full. So, but we should come back to the challenges as well. But for now, John, moving from technology to manufacturing and industrial companies, what are you seeing from your perspective about how's India doing in the manufacturing sector, and how does it link with all the other convergence of 4.0 as well as the push from government and Make in India and so on? How does it all come together, and do you see the same positive outlook as in technology?
Yeah, I think, again, this is not new, but the build-out of the digital twins, the large-scale digital twins, and the support, and in fact, the drop in price of monitoring equipment, along with the ability to handle so much more data quickly and accurately, is really the next step forward. We can get to the stage now very quickly where we can model complete processes rather than just looking at a boiler or looking at a particular machine. You can model the whole process. You can look at improvements in energy efficiency, in safety management, in emissions control. You can model changes through there, and you can tweak the system so it can make those changes to your process automatically. You're improving the safety for our operators, and you're improving the safety for the stakeholders in the community because they can trust that you're operating your equipment properly from that side. India has had access to cheap labor for a long time. That's going to disappear as the labor arbitrage moves and the skill sets change as well. So we need to make sure our employees are engaged in this new technology and use that as a way to train themselves up, to take themselves forward as well. Because we have to be as efficient as possible, as safe as possible, and as good a citizen as possible for our neighborhood. And by deploying the technology, we can test everything first, test it right, and then deploy it for everyone's benefit.
Let me point you to more specific, like where, like, do you see that as a advantage, competitive advantage going forward for India, or you think it's going to be a challenge?
Make in India is positive. It has to be sell from India as well. India's got to be the stage of exporting physical goods. Yes, we can make it effectively, but we have to scale up and get the quality known and getting the sustainability credentials of our products and use that as a method to sell into the rest of the world.
Okay. So I'm struggling to get a very yes or no answer, but we'll go with that.
Yes.
Go for it, please.
So if I believe there are two elements to this. I think if you look at India's domestic market and people are coming in because there is a cost of doing business is lower and the infrastructure is available for them to play, I think that is where India's biggest benefit is going to come from. So every success story which you see has actually resulted in where people have exploited the domestic market and then they have looked at exports. While, we always hear this story of one country versus another country, etc. But I think the domestic market is a place to play. So I think maybe that's a definitive answer if you want it.
And I think just building on that one, the question on everybody's mind is, I think the numbers absolutely make sense. It's like, 1.4 billion of population, 900 plus million customers. The real question becomes, how many of them are able to pay and what kind of services we pay. I think we see a wonderful example in mobile where the cost of data has been so commoditized that everybody or most of them can pay. Are there any examples where you can share where you see this happening, the mobilization of consumers?
So, we have built a large ecosystem with Gen Zs, as we call them, the digital always generation, right? And we build them in areas of their passion. So video games. So for example, we have the world's largest simulated cricket game. So while we have 500 million downloads, right, our paying consumers are still very few. But what has happened is that the brands, etc., that need to reach these consumers have no other way besides the platforms that these consumers are engaging with to reach them. So, at the end of the day, the average revenue per user will either come from where a consumer is spending or a brand spends. So India's got these complex models. So if you take a video gaming industry, for example, right? I mean, it's a $200 billion global industry, half of it mobile and maybe, the rest through console and PC, right? While India is probably 1% of the global market. We are about 17% of the gamers come from India. So if we have about 3.5 or 3.7 billion gamers around the world, 500 million now, 450, 500 million are in India, right? So size-wise, scale-wise, we have tremendous. But what's going to happen, like what we saw in China, once the per capita GDP goes up, right, this is going to convert to a paid user. And we're seeing that. If you see whether it's, today, conveniences, people are paying for it, right? You see in groceries, you see in many, many other areas. And we see that happening across the value chain for everything that, an Indian consumer is going to look at as one moves forward. So I think the fact that we always talk, we have 4 Indias. We have the bottom 400, 300, 400 million wanting to move out of poverty. Then you have another 300 million, middle class, then a few hundred million upper middle class, and then the luxury rich. There's always going to be upward mobility. So you might lose 100 million who are paying a lot more. You'll get a next set of 100 million. So if you look at India's consumer story or journey, because everybody has like 1.2 mobile phones, right? So, if you just look at that mobile and what that person's paying today, what's going to happen? You talked about India becoming third largest. Over the next 10-year period, I mean, there is no question which direction is going to head. How fast, which areas, what's going to be pushing is actually ultimately left for industry to do. And to some extent, I think government regulation. Because government's view on some of these things in India can have a massive impact. So I think if that balance is met, I think things will change a lot. And therefore, I do sound a lot more optimistic, but I see these areas as really, growing very fast.
Well, cricket is picking up a lot in US, so I think the first thing you can do is to bring the simulation in
exactly, US. Right? So the US ambassador to India, Eric Garcetti, he believes that the India-US relationship, cricket is the foundational building block. As a matter of fact, the LA Olympics now has cricket, as Olympic sport. We also own teams in the, not the IPL, but the state, the Maharashtra Premier League, and we won it twice. And we're seeing like those things can come back into US. We have leagues here. We have so much, and everywhere in the world, right? So I think India's soft power, that's the other big thing, that we can take through sport, through cricket, or through Bollywood, and even tourism. I think our opportunity is totally untapped as of now.
Okay. So let's maybe change track, given we are in Silicon Valley and we have this summit happening here. What, maybe starting with you, Dinesh, what kind of opportunities do you see for partnerships as well as collaborations between Indian companies such as yourself and the Silicon Valley, and what should the audience take away from that?
No, I think the very fact that all of us are here is I would call it the first stage of that journey of making sure we are actually able to actualize it. What has happened is, I think this part of the world has become, so to say, the magnet of almost all of the ideas, and many of them are globally relevant. I think the way I look at it is, India provides such scale, and in my mind, an opportunity to think of different solutions which are not necessarily relevant for the developed markets of the world. So I think the way I look at it is, companies here and Indian companies partnering with them to find innovative solutions which are unbelievably low cost or unbelievably better placed from providing the right set of solutions. I'll give you an example of healthcare in my mind. If we follow the US or the European model of healthcare in India, I think very soon India will just lose out on its ability to provide good health across the board. So what is the best solution which is going to address each of those, but at the same time find the, I would call it, innovative way of approaching solving a problem across the multiplicity of India. So that is where I think the challenges have to be thrown to the, I would call it, talent available here. And if that can be brought back to India by the Indian companies or even by the companies from Silicon Valley, I think it's maybe the best opportunity for us to look at. Maybe I'll just add one example because many people were speaking to me about the supply chain sector, etc. And I think one is technology solutions, which we hear a lot about, how AI is going to be applied, how data management is going to be used, etc. But I think if you look at the sheer cost of doing business and the innovation which can be brought in to that, again, in the developed markets, it's very different because outsourcing is very high. In the developing markets and the global south, it's very different. And a solution which is going to be applied for India is going to be applicable tomorrow for Africa and maybe other parts of Asia as well. So that is the reason why I'm very excited by the opportunity which both Indian companies and, in a way, I would call it, industry bodies can work very closely together to create this innovation platform.
Yes, please.
It's going to be also a combination of business models which need to be weaved into this, the whole supply chain, if you want to call it, or whichever way you look at the value chain of your product or service. I think you have to look at it from the perspective as to how this technologies will leapfrog that business model. So, for example, like again, I'm going back to agriculture, right? With ITC Group, it was a direct-to-market movement that was fueling the need for the farmers to get a better price to their products, right? And that was the technology was required to reduce the middlemen in the process. However, you need people to make the goods move from the fields to the market, right? So you still need them, but at least at the same time, you didn't want the noise of the middlemen, right, in the middle. So that was the problem, and then obviously the whole thing was to create a platform which will allow this collaboration to happen where farmers feel empowered about getting the right information, but at the same time, you have to have the sanchalaks and sanyojaks at the ground level who will actually advise them on the right process and things like that. But making this business model, meaning there is a process to incentivize everybody in that value chain, right? So that is how it can be built as a sustainable approach, because traditional solutions of, let's say, the way we see it in developed markets may not work for emerging countries or developing countries like India. And therefore, I think the challenges and the value that we can generate from India for many of these healthcare, agriculture, or education and hygiene and everything else, I think can be a dramatically innovative offering for everybody in the world. I mean, not just developed markets, but also every part of the world. So I think that is where I really feel that I think the scale part, like you were mentioning, is an amazing asset that India has to offer. The diversity in our population, their preferences, their expectations are so diverse that if you can make a solution which is working in India, it can really be a transformative solution for the rest of the world. Yeah.
Got it. So on the topic of sustainability, it's a good segue, maybe John, for you. While India is growing so much, obviously sustainability and usage of energy is such a big topic. And we see a lot of investments happening in the renewable energy space as well. But from your perspective, what are you seeing? I mean, both climate technology as a startup ecosystem and what's happening on that front, as well as what are the risks that that India as a country has due to climate.
I think on the climate side, the one that interests me most, it's been there for a little while, is in the farm sector. And this is the one that's got, for me, the biggest impact, both from an employment sector size. Farming is huge in India, and also it's so key because India does, it's also one of the opportunities for India to export as well, which is another opportunity there. But get down to the microclimate modeling. There's difficulties around gene manipulation and working with seeds, but you can then look at how we're using pesticides, how we're using fertilizers. At the field level or part of field level, you can use satellite technology, you can be using sensors in the ground, and maximize the efficiency and the efficacy of what you are using. Too often people just throw urea. Throw a bag of urea down there, it'll grow, but it will kill the soil as well. So we need to find ways of using the technology to encourage the farmers to use the right fertilizers, the right pesticides at the right time, having the supply chain stocked up so that those materials can be available in advance of the farmer needing that in different parts of the country at any one time. But the challenge then is going to be, what's the business model, like Alok said. Farmers are not going to pay up front. They want results. So we have to find a way of giving the results to the farmer, then justifying some sort of gain share or crop share on the back of that so we can take it forward. So from a climate side, or climate management side, that farming is really, really key for us. You can look forward at climate management, but for India, the most immediate and the best impact will be on the farming side.
So if we then think of CII's role in kind of facilitating all of these opportunities and challenges, maybe Dinesh, starting with you and Rajan after that, like what role can CII play in this whole ecosystem?
I think I mentioned in the morning that CII's role is not to be just an industry body, but a developmental institution. And I think it works on making sure that we develop the competitiveness of Indian industry, and that's been the theme right across the board. And over the years, maybe this is the only industry body I know across the world who has actually developed centers of excellence which focus on developing this competitiveness. And we have 10 centers of excellence. My belief is that if we work closely with the innovation platform which you have in the Silicon Valley, I think you will make a huge difference in facilitating, enabling, and in a way, I would call it making happen these partnerships in a sustainable manner. And it could be private to private, it could be, individual companies to other companies. In some cases, it could also be, so to say, blessed by some of the governments, as the case may be. And if you look at defense sector, if you look at space sector, if you look at technology, which is, I would call it cutting edge, I think these are all where the governments of this world are very keen to support and make happen. So I think CII's role has got to be to make all three of this happen. And can we be not just a catalyst, but also speed up this whole process, which is what I think Evolve is all about.
The larger view, if you take what CII, as Dinesh said, if you look at it as a developmental institution, is also, to be a convener of or a platform that can bring, the entire country together. So a very large agenda that CI has, in which I chair nationally for CI, is the India at 100 agenda. Really, which is aligned to Prime Minister Modi's, Viksit Bharat, or a developed India by 2047. So if you look at a large agenda like that, which is 20 years away, how does, industry play a key role to bring multiple stakeholders together, anchor this growth or, inclusive agenda, prioritize it over 5-year periods, is again a very interesting and exciting way to look at it. And I think the link, when you look at it from a Silicon Valley, when you have limited resources and very high aspirations, right, the only way to fold that future in and to take it there is to innovate. So India will always create its own solutions, will, keep the non-negotiables of that journey, which are very strongly Indian, right? Take, for example, as I was mentioning, price performance. Affordability is a key to everything that anyone innovates for India, right? Especially when you want to do it at scale and things like that. And if one were to see CII as an institution that can, take this umbrella of multiple stakeholders in an innovative spirit forward for India, then what CII really needs is to, one, plug into a global innovation system, right? And I think Silicon Valley provides that, because if you look at innovation anywhere in the world, and you talk of stakeholders from multiple countries solving different sets of problems, a presence out of Silicon Valley or a link to Silicon Valley is always there. And I think that's the bridge which I think Evolve, will do really well. And, like what we were talking in the morning, I think if you go back and you said, global supply chains, right, where some part of, incremental, efficiency in a supply chain comes from some country, some value, addition happens somewhere. If you look at innovation in that same spirit, right, where is the best academic input coming from? Where is the best, source of capital? Risk capital for certain types of industries might come from a different geography, it might come from a different vertical sector. So a vision of a global innovation ecosystem like that, which India will drive for the world. Because if you see Global South, challenges, needs, you were talking, are very similar to what India can do, right? And I think that's where India will make a big difference. But even if we look at countries in the West where, like take healthcare and the costs associated with that, India solutions over a period of time can work very significantly. So India really has this opportunity, and therefore this bridge with Silicon Valley for CII becomes increasingly important. And as we always say, there couldn't be a better time for India, US to come together to do more.
So I agree with all of that, but there's one statement that surprised me. You said Silicon Valley has less resources. Did I get that wrong?
No. I said India has less resources.
Okay.
What I meant is, if you look at aspirations of people in India, very high, because you're a young country, young people, right? I mean, I'm telling you, we touch the daily digital life of 1 in 3 Indians, right? And most of them Gen Zs. And you have to see the aspirations of that Indian. I mean, you look at even any Indian will never imagine a quality of life for their children worse than what they've had. I mean, you don't even think about it. But if you go to Europe today, you go to many other parts of the world, they're worried about the future. So India, there are many angles to it. When I say we have limited resources, high aspirations, and that's how every enterprise, large enterprise got built, right? I mean, if you don't have that, you're not a founder who will build something scalable, and that's the culture, of Silicon Valley. And I think India needs that as a country. So think of it in that manner.
Right.
That because I think Rajan is making a very, very good point. If you look at the solutions which have been thought of here, they have all been, as I said, applicable for, I would call it the requirements of the current world. I think India is actually presenting the future world. So I think that is where the global south impact can be. I think that's how I look at it.
So coming back to the resources point that you mentioned, one of course, a big need for India is to keep upskilling the resources and so on. So maybe John, starting with you, and then Alok, what are you seeing ways in which upskilling is happening across India, but specifically in companies to keep up with the changing landscape, not just in technology, but beyond?
I think gone are the days of just throwing lots of people at a job and getting done. India is embracing bringing more technology in and allowing our employees to be trained and train themselves, upskill themselves. They're using technology as a tool for themselves and not a threat to themselves. And one of the things I'm really happy about is that with technology coming in, more and more technology in the workplace, and people moving away from 100% manual labor into a mixture or hybrid labor and desktop work, is you're bringing in people who are previously excluded from the workforce into the workforce. Now, that could be economic minorities, disabled, wherever else, but more and more people are getting an opportunity to grow, and that has to be good.
Yeah, and just to extend that, I think that COVID actually was a great learning for the not just organizations but also the public, to see that work can happen and you can still ride that particular pandemic with the back of work from anywhere model. So that has been a big part of that technology evolution that has happened, and people have started to trust those systems in a way that was never possible earlier. So I think we've sort of embraced that philosophy in the company, and that is one of the ways in which we are allowing people to have flexible work options. And the second is that I think the inclusion of the women in the workforce, I think, is another big part of that, and driving that particular creativity, innovation, culture is the third part of it. So I think a lot of that rewards systems need to be evolved and they're evolving in our organizations to support these levers for the next set of teams. And putting training for the sake of training is half the story. But I think having that culture of building those things and hackathons and many things which are required to really put that entrepreneurship, innovation spirit in the team members is something that we are really focused on. These are some of the small things that we are doing, at least to go in the right direction. Yeah.
Got it. So we started with glass half full, but I feel like the glass is overflowing now. So let me turn it around and maybe very quickly to each one of you in this order. What is the single biggest challenge that you see for India?
I think it is managing the states and the ability for them to grow, as I said, equitably. And I think the awareness is there across. India is a federation, and as you look at especially certain pockets of the east and maybe even I would say some pockets of the rest of the India, I think you do see these areas of I would call it inequitable growth. That for me is going to be the biggest challenge for us to solve. I don't think we can expect that to be taken care of by just pure government intervention. It has to result in private sector participation in that. I'm sure all of you are aware the government had announced this 36 aspirational districts, and each of them are actually from even developed states. But you will see parameters of what I would call development not being the same across those. So I think that's the biggest challenge I see.
No, I think inequity is definitely the biggest challenge, and I think linked to that is accessibility, and I think the ability for India, therefore, to create access at every level. Given that we are a complex federal, state, government, structure, but I think at the end of the day, the cohesion and the trust between industry, stakeholders and government, from a long-term standpoint is very, very critical, I think, from an India perspective. And therefore, having more conversations, building consensus around issues, and more so in a world which is more uncertain, very largely technology-driven. I mean, AI regulation is going to be a big part, I think, of how things will, help reduce inequity in India, right? If we don't get that right, we will miss out on an opportunity to use AI to just create a better balance in society. I'm just giving one very simple example, since this is so much of an AI-driven thing and where we have such a large part. So I think doing that, and also, including 1.5 million people into the workforce every month, 1 million young people, hungry, can create social stress also if we don't get that right. So I think a sense of urgency on this prioritization, while of course there are so many issues that need to be addressed, will happen. And the beauty is that we can create focused prioritization year on year, and actually drive towards those outcomes.
So Alok and John, you need to pick up new ones, new challenges though.
I'll try. I think sustainable and inclusive growth is, I think, the biggest challenge in my view, because it took us post-independence like 50 years just to get to a much better liberalized economy, and then, getting the comfort of having a very healthy balance of public and private enterprises, and, growing the income levels, the per capita income levels of our citizens. I think that has been a good, steady growth in that space. But like when Rajan was mentioning about 2047 agenda, I think you were talking about the largest population in the world. You're talking about like millions of people joining workforce every. So the amount of stakes now for us to really do the per cap. See, it's good to have a GDP which is third largest, right? But then if you look at the GDP per capita, I think that is still low, right? So I think the challenge for India is going to be, how do we make that AI transformation or whatever technology transformation in a way that is sustainable and inclusive, and it helps uplift millions of our citizens to a better livelihood. I think that seems to be the dichotomy of hyper-personalization, scale, but at the same time, driving the livelihoods. I think those would be the two different dimensions. Somehow we have to balance those two. Yeah.
John, last but not the least. The next question, you go first. So.
I think India has the opportunity now to lead the world in sustainability. Both if you look at the work that's been done around small modular reactors, or energy conservation and generation, battery storage, wherever else. But the timing's right now for India to capitalize on the amount of technologies available, the skill set that India has in its people, this demographic advantage now. You can't waste it over the next 10 years. It could become the manufacturing hub for the world. It can replace China, not just in plastic toys, but in real value-added equipment. I think that's India's opportunity now.
I love the optimism of the panel. Even the biggest challenge is positioned as the opportunity. So I know we are coming up on time. Why don't we just do a quick summary, starting with you, John, on looking at India at 100 years of independence. What are your key thoughts, and do you need anything? What thoughts should the audience take away?
I think it's India for the next couple of decades will be, if it's done properly, a really controlled growth path. Will give sustainable improvements to everyone and lift the country up, lift the marginalized population up into acceptable levels of living. I think that's what the opportunity is for India.
Okay. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think very clearly the technology revolution that is all around us is real, and it's obviously going to multiply and multiplier force. So from that standpoint, I think very clearly we have an advantage of being a tech-savvy country already. But how do we really, embrace this in a way that, it's like at least 10 different dimensions that are needed really to make a very inclusive and sustainable growth, as I was mentioning. So how do we make an agenda which actually helps us get there in that fashion, I think is a challenge, and I think it's also an opportunity for us. So I think that's something that all the bodies that like this one and the CII and all the other bodies are really in the right space to help uplift that agenda for the country. So I'm all behind that to make sure whatever we can do as individuals or as a companies, we provide that support. Yeah.
So if we look at India as in a position of global leadership, right, or achieving holistic global leadership in the next 23, 24 years, I think various factors need to happen, right? I think if we take our core of manufacturing, agriculture, services, right, how do we really come up to world-class level, especially on agriculture and manufacturing, because that's a large part of our workforce that will continue to be there. How do we really look at our soft powers, like sports and arts and, tourism and things like that, to really position India correctly in the world and to be able to cut across, borders very differently, using our rich cultural heritage or the soft power of India. Technology is always going to be India's strength because it's our people who have shaped not only in the valley, everywhere in the world, and we've seen that recognition coming for that. So be it digital, be it, sustainable technologies or even transformative technologies of the future. So any new technology intervention, I think India has a very, very key role to play and maybe leapfrog. But having said all of that, our core, whether it's education, healthcare, governance, and things like infrastructure, urbanization, that has to transform radically. And if all of this happens over the next 20 years in very focused, prioritized manner, I think India can truly achieve that larger aspiration. So I think I just kind of broke it up to see that these are all different priorities. You're running a marathon, you need to do it in 400-meter sprints, because never in the history of the world has a 1.5 billion, size country, democratically elected, moved from being a developing country to the developed country. Never in the history of mankind. I mean, China was not a democracy in that sense. But so if that has to happen over the next 20 years at that size and scale, we have to do it differently.
Actually, Rajan summarized most of the points, so I can only add one element to it, which is what I honestly and sincerely believe. I think if India is going to take the lead in the next 20 years, it has to create solutions which are uniquely Indian. And that cuts across infrastructure, because I think if you follow the model of what the rest of the world has done, you are going to end in the same perils which the developed world is entering into today. And everywhere you go, you are finding that as a big, big challenge, whether it be Europe or other parts of the world which have been, so to say, role models of what people should do. So my belief is, starting with innovation, starting with the way in which we approach each of the themes of our growth story, we have to be truly unique. And that, what is the answer for that? Obviously, if you ask me, I don't think anyone has an answer. But, starting with assets, starting with infrastructure creation, I think if you just follow the model of, say, China, where, infrastructure was created without, in a way, worrying about the commercial logic of it. But if I take the success stories which are, take solar for example, or wind for example, you brought down the cost to a commercially viable cost and still made it feasible for the change to take place. That for me is what is going to differentiate India in the next 20 years. And that includes technology, that includes everything.
Well said. Very well said. So there you go. A wonderful set of thoughts from our esteemed panel. And so many takeaways, but clearly there is so much opportunity, so much growth. It feels like, the exciting times are not just behind us, but even more exciting times ahead. So keep an eye on India as the next frontier. Thank you very much.
Thank you.